Have you ever noticed how the mind becomes louder exactly when we most need it to be still? We sit before a decision, feeling the invisible weight of consequences pressing against our chest, and the mind begins to spin like a restless storm. In those moments, even the smallest doubt can sound like thunder. It is here, within this delicate space between clarity and confusion, that ancient wisdom and modern curiosity meet, and where the scent of something as humble as rosemary can awaken a forgotten stillness inside us. Edgar Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, often spoke of the profound intelligence of nature. He believed that the body, mind, and spirit were not separate entities but instruments of a single vibration, like strings on the same lyre, resonating in harmony when properly tuned. For Cayce, rosemary was more than an herb. It was a bridge between the physical and the mental, a messenger of clarity. He suggested that simply rubbing fresh rosemary on one's temples before meditation or decision-making could help realign the currents of thought, sharpening intuition and calming mental noise. It wasn't magic, he would say. It was resonance. Think about that for a moment. Resonance. Every thought, emotion, and breath vibrates at a certain frequency. When fear enters, our energy scatters. When we breathe deeply, it settles. Plants, in their silent wisdom, carry stable frequencies, vibrations that remind the human mind of its natural rhythm. Rosemary, in particular, carries the fragrance of focus, of grounded lucidity. The act of rubbing its leaves against the skin is not merely a ritual. It is a conversation between two forms of life, one seeking peace, the other offering it. Modern science, interestingly, has begun to whisper similar truths. Studies have shown that the scent of rosemary can enhance memory, improve concentration, and even lower cortisol levels, the chemical shadow of stress. Yet beyond these measurable effects lies something subtler, the way an aroma can pull us back into presence. When we inhale the essence of a living plant, something ancient stirs within us, the same intelligence that guided early humans to trust the earth for medicine, meaning, and connection. The fragrance becomes a key, unlocking the door to the present moment. Cayce often reminded his followers that clarity was never a gift granted from outside, but a state rediscovered within. The rosemary was not the source of clarity, it was the invitation to remember it. To him, every decision we face, from the smallest to the most life-altering, is an opportunity to reattune our inner compass. The more we practice stillness, the more we realize that intuition is not the opposite of logic, but its completion. When the mind quiets, truth doesn't need to shout. It simply becomes evident, like sunlight returning after the fog. So when we rub rosemary between our fingers, when its oils release that sharp green scent, we are engaging in something far more sacred than an old herbal trick. We are saying to ourselves, I am ready to listen again. The aroma carries us out of the noise and into the simple awareness of being. For a few breaths, decisions lose their heaviness, and what once felt urgent begins to unfold with natural timing. The body relaxes, the mind clears, and within that pause, insight often appears, not as a thought, but as a quiet knowing that feels like home. Perhaps that is what Cayce truly meant when he spoke of activating clarity in 60 seconds, not a technique to control the mind, but a gesture to remind it of its original calm. We don't command clarity, we create the conditions for it to return. The rosemary on the temples is a symbol, a whisper from nature saying, remember, you are part of something ordered, alive, and wise. And maybe if we listen closely enough, we'll hear that whisper echoing back from within us, guiding the next breath, the next choice, the next step on our path toward deeper understanding. When we think of clarity, we often imagine it as a lightning strike, sudden, blinding, decisive. But true clarity rarely arrives with such drama. It comes quietly, like the tide advancing on the shore. It takes patience, rhythm, and a willingness to listen. Edgar Cayce understood this subtlety well. He taught that the human mind was not meant to be conquered or silenced, but harmonized. The rosemary on the temples was never about forcing focus. It was about remembering how to tune ourselves to the frequency of calm awareness. Just as a musician must listen to each note before it joins the melody, we too must listen inwardly before we decide. In this way, rosemary becomes more than a plant. It becomes a teacher. Each time we bring its fragrance to our senses, it invites us to participate in the simplicity of life. The plant does not hurry to grow. It does not question the sunlight or doubt the rain. It just fulfills its purpose: to exist, to give, to heal. And in that natural obedience to being, there is a profound lesson. When we act from confusion, we act from fear's rhythm, erratic and unsteady. But when we pause, breathe, and align with the quiet pulse of nature, clarity arises not because we demand it, but because we match it. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a lake. Every thought, every worry, every expectation is a stone thrown into its surface. The more stones you throw, the murkier the water becomes. Yet if you stop, if you allow stillness, the ripples fade. The lake clears, and the reflection of the sky returns. Cayce's practice of using rosemary before decisions was, in essence, a ritual for stilling the waters. The fragrance signaled to the body that it was time to stop tossing stones, to be still long enough for truth to reflect itself back to you. There's something humbling in realizing that our greatest insights rarely come from effort. They come when we release effort. Have you ever noticed that the answer to a problem often appears after you've stopped thinking about it? Perhaps while walking or showering or gazing at the horizon. That's not coincidence. It's the universe's way of saying, now that you've stopped shouting, you can finally hear. Cayce's ritual of rosemary was one way of cultivating this receptive silence, a physical reminder to step out of the storm and back into the eye of it, where peace waits like a patient friend. It's no surprise that rosemary has been associated with remembrance for centuries. In ancient Greece, scholars would wear garlands of rosemary during exams to enhance their focus and memory. But memory, in its deeper sense, isn't just about recalling information. It's about remembering ourselves, who we are beneath the noise of the world. The rosemary pressed against the temples awakens that inner remembrance, bridging the gap between the restless surface of the mind and the still depth of the soul. It's as if the plant's essence whispers, remember what you already know. And what is it that we already know? That truth, intuition, and wisdom are not out there waiting to be found. They live quietly within us, obscured only by the dust of distraction. The rosemary helps sweep that dust away, not by adding anything new, but by revealing what has always been present. Cayce's teachings often echoed this paradox, that healing, whether of the body or the mind, is less about introducing change and more about restoring balance. Clarity, then, is not a new state we must create. It is our natural state uncovered. So the next time we feel the chaos of decision-making closing in, perhaps we can turn to this simple ritual, not as superstition, but as communion. To take a sprig of rosemary, to feel its coarse leaves, to breathe in its green fire, is to reconnect with something ancient and benevolent. It is to remember that wisdom is not rushed, that the heart already knows the direction before the mind draws the map. And as we press the herb against our temples, we are not invoking a miracle. We are invoking ourselves, the quiet, centered, luminous self that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise all along. There is a quiet courage in choosing stillness when the world urges movement. To pause, to breathe, to touch a leaf of rosemary before a decision. It seems so small, almost insignificant. Yet it is precisely in these small acts of awareness that the architecture of transformation begins. Edgar Cayce often said that the most powerful forces in life are invisible. Faith, intention, vibration. To him, the ritual was not about the herb itself, but about aligning consciousness with those unseen currents. He understood that every decision carries not only practical consequences, but energetic ripples that echo through our lives. And so he advised people to make choices not from anxiety, but from harmony. Harmony, that word alone carries a frequency. It speaks of instruments in tune, of the universe itself vibrating in perfect proportion. When we are out of alignment, life feels dissonant. Things resist, thoughts collide, timing fails. But when we return to balance, through breath, awareness, or the scent of rosemary, we begin to feel the flow again. Our decisions become extensions of that flow. They don't force the river to move faster, they simply allow it to continue in its natural course. This is the secret that Cayce knew. Clarity is not achieved by tightening the mind, but by loosening the grip. Consider for a moment how most of us approach important choices. We analyze, list pros and cons, consult opinions, rehearse possibilities. Yet for all our effort, we often end up more uncertain. That's because clarity doesn't come from collecting data, it comes from aligning energy. The mind, when overfed with information, becomes bloated and sluggish. The heart, however, remains agile, intuitive, immediate. When Cayce spoke of placing Rosemary on the temples, he was really guiding attention back to the temple within, the inner sanctuary where wisdom waits. The scent awakens not just neurons but remembrance. It tells the mind, you are not alone in this decision. You are part of something infinitely wise. There's an old teaching in many spiritual traditions that the universe is not made of matter, but of attention. Wherever we place our attention, we give birth to form. Rosemary, in its simplicity, becomes a focusing lens, drawing our scattered awareness into a single point of presence. When the fragrance rises, our senses converge. The noise of mental chatter begins to fade, replaced by a quiet alertness. In that silence, the right path often reveals itself, not as a loud announcement, but as a soft inner nod. It is the moment when you stop questioning and instead simply know. Cayce's approach might seem mystical, but its foundation is deeply practical. Think of how much of our indecision comes not from lack of information, but from lack of connection to ourselves, to the moment, to our own truth. We rush to choose before we have truly arrived in the now. The Rosemary ritual slows us down just enough for presence to catch up. It reintroduces intimacy with our own perception. The mind becomes a listening field instead of a battlefield, and when the mind listens, life speaks. Sometimes through intuition, sometimes through synchronicity, sometimes through a feeling that settles softly in the heart, like sunlight on still water. Even modern psychology affirms what Cayce intuited a century ago. Sensory grounding, especially through scent, can instantly shift our brain state from chaos to coherence. It quiets the amygdala, regulates the breath, and rebalances the nervous system. But beyond science, there is mystery. The scent of rosemary has a way of pulling memory from the depths, not just of this life, but perhaps of many lives lived before. It reconnects us with a lineage of wisdom that stretches far beyond our personal timeline. It reminds us that we have always known how to choose. We simply forget amid the noise of modern living. So when we pause before a decision and bring rosemary to our temples, we are not performing an act of superstition. We are reclaiming an ancient technology of consciousness. We are saying, I will not let the world rush me out of my center. We are stepping out of linear time and back into sacred rhythm, and in that rhythm the mind no longer races ahead or lingers behind. It rests in perfect balance with the present. That is where all true decisions are made, not in the noise of thought but in the silence of being. It is there that clarity becomes not a pursuit, but a state, as natural and effortless as breathing, as inevitable as light returning after night. There comes a moment after all the searching when we realize that clarity was never something to be found. It was something to be remembered. We chase understanding as though it hides somewhere outside us, waiting to be earned through effort or logic. But the more we search, the more the horizon seems to retreat. Edgar Cayce's wisdom reminds us that the horizon is not the destination. It is the mirror of our gaze. When the mind stops chasing, the horizon comes closer. When we stop trying to control clarity, we become clear. The rosemary pressed gently to the temples becomes a sacred gesture of remembrance, a return to the inner space where truth has always been waiting. Think of the rosemary now not as an herb, but as a symbol of awakening. Its leaves, slender and resilient, hold within them the essence of focus and faith. When crushed, they release fragrance, a perfect metaphor for the human spirit. It is often under pressure that our true nature is revealed. We grow, not by avoiding life's weight, but by allowing it to press gently against us until the aroma of our own wisdom rises to the surface. Every decision we face, every challenge we meet, is an opportunity for that fragrance to unfold. A reminder that life's purpose is not to test us but to awaken us. Cayce's practice, simple as it was, points toward a larger truth, that every tool of awakening is hidden in the ordinary. We do not need sacred temples or distant retreats to reconnect with ourselves. The divine is present in a leaf of rosemary, in the breath we take before speaking, in the stillness between thoughts. When we approach life with reverence, the mundane becomes mystical. The act of rubbing an herb upon our temples becomes an act of devotion, not to a higher power outside, but to the sacred presence within. And when we honor that presence, clarity is no longer something we seek, it is something we are. Imagine standing before a decision now, feeling that old tension in your chest. The world might still be noisy. The future might still be uncertain. But this time, instead of rushing toward the answer, you pause. You reach for the rosemary, breathe in its living scent, and feel your body soften. Your mind, once a tangle of thoughts, begins to quiet. A calm intelligence rises, gentle, confident, unhurried. In that silence, a simple realization emerges. The answer does not need to be forced. It will come, as it always does, when you are aligned with the rhythm of your own soul. That is the moment of true clarity, not an explosion of insight, but a soft unfolding of trust. And trust is the final lesson. Cayce often said that faith is not belief without proof, but peace without control. To trust the process of life is to surrender the illusion that we must think our way to safety. The rosemary ritual teaches this through experience. The scent anchors us to presence, and presence dissolves fear. When the mind returns to the body and the body to the breath, decisions cease to feel like battles. They become conversations between your present self and your highest self, a dialogue carried by intuition, not argument. You no longer ask, well, what should I do, but rather, what feels true? And that simple shift changes everything. Perhaps this is why ancient healers called rosemary the herb of remembrance. Not because it helps us remember facts, but because it helps us remember ourselves. The self that is not fragmented by doubt or hurry, the self that already knows the way. When we cultivate this remembrance, life begins to move differently. The right people appear, the right doors open, the right timing unfolds. It's not coincidence, it's coherence. We are finally resonating with the frequency of our own truth, and the universe, ever responsive, mirrors that vibration back to us with grace. So as we end this reflection, carry this small practice with you, not as superstition but as a daily reminder. When the world feels heavy with choice, when your mind begins to race, pause for 60 seconds. Touch the rosemary, breathe in its green clarity, and let it guide you back to the center of yourself. Let its scent remind you that peace is not elsewhere, that wisdom is not lost, and that you are never separate from the source of your own guidance. And when you find that still point, that quiet light within, share this understanding with others. Tell them what you discovered in the pause, what you felt when you finally listened, because in a world that rushes, your stillness becomes medicine. If this reflection touched something within you, share it, in words, in silence, or in presence. And if you wish to walk further along this path of remembrance and inner clarity, I invite you to stay close, to breathe with us again in the next journey. Until then, may the scent of rosemary remind you always of who you truly are.